Like and subscribe right now, or you're going to have terrible luck for the next week. No one fancies the idea of spending their time in the basement. This is only natural since, honestly speaking, most basements aren't that inviting. And if you've just moved into a house, the probability of running into something unpleasant is pretty high. Take, for instance, finding hundreds of human bones right under your house. That's what workers ran into in a house that once belonged to Benjamin Franklin. Here are other spooky things that people have found in their basements. Number 10. An old lady doll. Typically, dolls aren't of aged people and are made to convey neutral emotions. But a doll posted by a Reddit user was the exact opposite of these qualities. Discovered in the basement of an estate sale, the doll was that of an old lady, and the face depicted someone in deep pain. Also, a couple of the doll's teeth and both of the index fingers were missing. The doll itself was in a tightly sealed box, which raises even more questions about the spooky thing. Well, it's just a doll, but you can't help but wonder why someone would make it that way and hide it from the world. Number 9. Fetuses in a jar. In February 2012, 2 workmen found 2 jars each with a fetus in the basement of a building they were working on in Hannibal, Missouri. According to the owner, the find lent more credibility to the rumors that the building was once a clinic carrying out unlawful procedures on pregnant women in the 1900s. The owner, Mr. Neff, recalls being told about other jars when he was younger by his parents, but they never mentioned what was in them. His parents bought the property in the 1950s, in which the father used it as a chiropractic clinic. The fetuses were later given a proper burial thanks to a local funeral home that donated a casket and a plot. The police, on the other hand, decided not to pursue the matter any further. Number 8. An alligator. Imagine bumping into an adult gator just hanging out lazily in your basement. A repairman in Lansing, Michigan had such an encounter back in January 2016 when he was called in to render his services. And it wasn't some teensy reptile at that. According to reports, the homeowner had been keeping this exotic pet for well over 20 years, which means the gator had grown to its full size. It measured roughly 6 feet and weighed in at 200 pounds. The repairman was lucky that the gator was caged because an ambush would have left him at a disadvantage as far as fighting back was concerned. According to his account, he noticed some movement in a covered container and went to investigate. That's how he found the exotic pet, took photos of it, and immediately notified the authorities. Number 7. 2 students at Ohio State University had the absolute shock of their lives when they discovered they had been living with a third roommate all along. It all happened when they stumbled on a locked door in the basement, which they thought led to some utility closet. But when the door was knocked down, they found a furnished room complete with textbooks and framed photographs, all indicators that someone else had access to this basement, and they had no idea who it was. So they had the locks changed and posted a note asking whoever had access to the room to call them. And they sure did get a call from a Jeremy, who then moved out immediately. Apparently, Jeremy's cousin had lived in the house the year before, and that's how he'd gotten hold of the keys. The leasing company hadn't bothered to change the locks. Granted, Jeremy didn't have any ulterior motives. Number 6. An artillery shell. Back in July 2017, Judith Sobreski was pulling up tiles in her basement when she saw a rather strange object lodged between the floor and the wall. Of course, out of curiosity, she moved in for a closer look, and that's when it dawned on her that this strange object in her hands was an artillery shell. Naturally taken aback by this revelation, she immediately called the police who, after ascertaining that it was indeed a shell, called for more backup from the fire department and other relevant servicemen. The shell was later found to have been from World War I and took the authorities 4 hours to clear the area around the apartment and safely move it. Considering that it was still live, it's easy to see how things might have gone south real quick had Miss Sobreski tried to handle the shell herself. Number 5. Snakes. Snakes are the absolute hair raisers for most people, and things can get even messier if you get one of these serpents in a confined space like your basement. And even more blood-curdling is when you meet not one, but a whole family of these reptiles just hanging out right in your residence. In 2009, had the worst revelation of their life when they found out that their newly purchased house had a snake nest. Ben Sessions and his wife, Amber, were pretty excited to move to their new home in Ruxburg, Idaho, but they noticed something odd soon enough. While the surrounding area was without snakes, they kept picking up the reptiles right in their backyard. They also kept hearing noises from under the floor, and their water had an onion-like taste, so they decided to investigate. Removing a panel of sliding was all they needed to get to the bottom of the noise. A ball of snakes came pouring out, and guess what the oniony taste of the water was coming from? The snake's musk. Ew. Turns out the previous owner had fled the home due to the same problem of snake infestation, but the real estate agent decided to resell the same property without fixing it. On their part, it would cost the couple at least $100,000 to get rid of the snake problem, so they filed for bankruptcy and moved out of the property immediately. Number 4. Mummified infant remains. Finding human remains anywhere is guaranteed to be enough of a scare for most people. But getting long-dead mummified infants in a basement scales this scare to a whole new level. That's what happened in some apartment in Los Angeles in 2010. A woman, Gloria Gonzalez, had just found 3 trunks in the basement of her house, and curiosity got the best of her, so she decided to investigate, probably hoping to run into a treasure of sorts. She didn't have much luck with the first 2, seeing as they were empty, but she uncovered something when she finally tore away the lock at the 3rd one. Inside the wrapping, there were mummified remains of 2 babies, much to Gloria's horror. She immediately called the police, who stepped in to try and unravel the origin of the mummies. According to reports, the trunks belonged to a woman named Jeanette M. Barry. Also, DNA tests determined that the kids had belonged to her, but just what happened to them will forever be a mystery. Interesting to note is that the trunk's owner had the same initials as the famed Peter Pan writer J.M. Barrie. Number 3. A collection of dolls. Hanny's is a restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona, barely known for a group of dolls in its basement. Accessible through a spiral staircase, the basement is a site of an eerie scene of over 10 dolls arranged along a table like they're having a meal. And even more unsettling is the thought that some of the dolls disappear and new ones come in all the time, with the mesh fence surrounding them remaining intact. But maybe some of the new dolls are probably brought in by either employees or customers who've been drawn in by the creepiness. The whole doll arrangement isn't without explanation, though. According to the owner, the dolls were set up as a short art installation, but for some reason, they stayed to this day. Customers can now take a trip down into the basement to gaze at the eerie figurines as they sip on their drinks. Now it's time for today's best pick. Today's photo was sent to us by a subscriber, so if you come across a photo online and want to know more details about it, just send it over to us. We might even feature it in a future video. Number 2. Tiny human skeletons with wings. This tiny humanoid was reportedly found in an 18th century stash that was discovered in the basement of a London residence that belonged to Thomas Theodore Merlin, a wealthy aristocrat and biologist of the same period. According to Alex CF, the artist who reported about this find, the humanoid, was found among a larger collection of equally intriguing figurines back in 1960, when the said residence was about to be demolished. Alex claims that thousands of these bizarre objects were discovered in tight wooden boxes and represent the obsession of a man way ahead of his time. But much of these claims and the authenticity of the figurines remain unsubstantiated for a larger part. According to some online skeptics, if the find was that much authentic, the British Museum would have dedicated resources in the study of the different contents of the box. Alex might have made up the whole story to promote his art project. Nevertheless, the figurine here can be one hell of a scare if you were to randomly come across it in the basement. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and you'll get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it. It really works. Number 1. Human skeletal remains. This is guaranteed to throw off any person because you're going to assume you've uncovered some burial ground. In 1998, construction workers uncovered over 1,000 pieces of bones from a house they had been called to work on in London. But not all of them belonged to humans. It was more of an assortment of different animals. Collectively, human bones were obtained from about 15 people. Naturally, such a find is worthy of telling the authorities about. The bones had everything to do with an anatomy school that was run by William Hewson, who was a close friend of Franklin's. Being that such studies were largely illegal and frowned upon at the time, most scientists conducted them in secrecy. So Hewson might have sneaked in bodies from somewhere else, did the dissections, and buried whatever remained in the basement to reduce the chances of being found out. The house was quite convenient to him since the owner was his mother-in-law, and he had a great friend in Franklin.